Thank you. Well, you know, not all of us grew up in this region of the country. And not all remedies are mountain remedies, unless, of course, you're talking about the mountains of the Bronx, New York. My hometown. Grandma, my throat is sore. Even though I was only 5 years old, I knew that my grandmother had a remedy for everything. If they had put my grandmother in charge of curing cancer, it would be done by now. She would have used one of her typical home remedies. For an internal ailment, it was always chicken soup, the Jewish penicillin, or honey and lemon. For an external, it was always soak mit Epsom salt. That took care of everything. So when I told Grandma that my throat was sore, she said, "Oy vey, we'll have to get on that right away. We'll fix it right up." And fix it right up she did. But Grandma started the way any good doctor would. A diagnosis first. Come by the window with the light, open your mouth wide, wide. Oi, it's red. Let's see, we'll start with honey and lemon. Oh good, that was my favorite. Grandma took a great big tablespoon of honey and squeezed fresh lemon over it. It felt good going down. Well, am I better yet? Don't count your chickens. What chickens? We lived in the Bronx. I did not know what she meant, but it wasn't doing a good job. Grandma, it still hurts. Okay, we'll move on to the chicken soup. She opened the refrigerator. My grandmother's refrigerator, in those days, she still called it an ice box. It was about the size of a hotel refrigerator today. There was no leftover chicken soup. A freezer the size of a shoebox had nothing there. Don't worry, I'm gonna run to the butcher and get fresh chickens. And back she came with 2 chickens. Obviously, she was counting her chickens. Grandma then took the tweezer and plucked out the last few feathers from those chickens, and the ones she couldn't get to, she took a match and burned off the feathers. Then she washed the chickens, cut them up, and in a pot the size of a small bathtub, put the chickens, carrots that I had helped to peel, celery, parsnip, turnip, fresh parsley. She covered all of that with water and put in enough kosher salt so that it would all float to the top. But it was taking forever, Grandma. It still hurts. And then there was a knock on the door. Enter Mrs. Russo. In an apartment building in the Bronx, if somebody's sick, everybody knows, and everybody comes to help. Mrs. Russo explained that her grandmother from the old country, her old country was Italy. My grandmother also came from the old country. Hers was Poland. Mrs. Russo said that her grandmother took sage leaves and put them in a pot and cooked them and cooked them and cooked them until she had delicious sage tea. And that's what she had brought for me. It was disgusting. I can't drink that. I'm going to throw up. I was right. But Mrs. Russo folded her arms over her ample chest and dared me not to complete the cure. Grandma was of the belief you never offend a helpful neighbor. But she did look at Mrs. Russo and say, Maybe it isn't working because she's not Italian. There was another knock at the door. Enter Mrs. Brown. Mrs. Brown came in carrying a box of Morton salt. I recognized the little girl on the front, and even though I couldn't read, I knew the label said, "Even when it rains, it pours." She was bringing me salt so that I could gargle with salt water, but she was also holding a stick. Mrs. Brown explained that her slave grandmother cured all throat hurt by cooking this licorice root and making tea from it. I had already had sage tea and I hated licorice, especially after gargling with salt water. But my grandmother believed in the salt water cure. That was one that she knew of. So they stood there, the three women at my grandmother's stove, sort of like Macbeth's three witches. My grandmother stirring the cauldron, Mrs. Brown cooking the licorice root, Mrs. Russo supervising everything with her arms folded over her ample chest, and my whining, "Am I gonna be better yet?" And Grandma saying she's counting her chickens. And Mrs. Russo and Mrs. Brown seemed to understand what she meant. I decided it was the motto of a club to which I did not belong. Finally, the chicken soup was ready, and these nice women sat down to help me take the chicken soup cure. Grandma ladled in 4 bowls, and they made me sip slowly. I was trying to gargle with the chicken soup, but that didn't work very well. "Grandma, it still hurts." And then there was a knock on the door. Enter Mrs. Murphy. Mrs. Murphy entered with a brown bag, and she looked at us and said, "I heard about the sore throat. Me Irish grandmother said there's only one thing that can cure a sore throat." And she whipped from that bag a bottle of Irish whiskey. Grandma wasn't sure, but Mrs. Russo and Mrs. Brown chorused that it was an excellent cure. They explained to Grandma that it was sort of like schnapps. "Oh," said Grandma, "maybe it will help." And Mrs. Murphy said, "Don't count your chickens." It was a club. And we sat at the table as Mrs. Murphy instructed me to take small, slow sips while the other 3 were drinking heavily. Grandma said, "It couldn't hurt." It didn't. I slept all afternoon. The next morning, I was cured. God bless Mrs. Murphy.
Why she has been a featured teller at the National Storytelling Festival. Corinne will be here at the International Storytelling Center all week long, Tuesday through Saturday at 2 p.m. I advise you to get your tickets now because she always sells out quickly.
All right, there's the bells and whistles. And I know what that sound is, everyone. The time our cast comes together to show their deep thoughts and wisdom. Tonight, we're doing things a little differently. Since our show is about healing, we thought we'd ask our cast members about some of the old home remedies and cures they've been taught throughout the years.
If you have arthritis, have a cat sit on your knees whenever you have arthritic pain.
Or mix turpentine with either vegetable oil
an egg, or animal fat, or all three, and rub it on your skin.
Granddaddy always said to put 2 horse chestnuts in your pants pockets for arthritis.
No, no, no. 1 large thimble of gunpowder, mix in a tablespoon of milk. After taking that, drink a good ½ pint of milk separately. Then go to bed with a lot of warm blankets and sweat a lot.
If a child has a bad dream, you rub garlic on their feet.
If you're bleeding and don't have a bandage, put a spider web on the cut to seal it.
If you get a fish bone caught in your throat, swallow a raw egg.
Bull bleep. I thought you were supposed to eat soft bread.
Oh, that probably works.
If you catch a head cold, eat a roasted Spanish onion before going to bed.
If you get a corn and you can't get it off, take 1 genuine mother of pearl in a saucer. Squeeze lemon juice over the button in the morning and in the evening for a week. The button turns to paste. Then spread this paste over the corn and cover with a bandage. Repeat daily until the corn is gone.
If you eat coleslaw before you drink, you won't get drunk. The problem is, I never know how much coleslaw to eat, so it hasn't worked for me yet.
If your child gets a fever, chop up raw onions and put them in a linen cloth. Tie this to your child's feet. In the morning, the fever should be gone.
To cure a hangover, when you wake up in the morning, take a 1/4 of a lemon and rub the juicy side under each armpit.
For hiccups, hold a penny between any 2 toes on 1 foot and then transfer the penny to any other 2 toes on the other foot, but you can't let it touch the floor.
No, that's not right. You're wearing a nutmeg around your neck.
No, that's not either. That's not it. For hiccups, you take something cold that's made of metal, like a spoon, and you tie it on a string and lower it down the hiccuping person's back.
For memory problems, drink sage tea.
To prevent sunstroke, put a cool, wet cabbage leaf on the crown of your head under your hat.
For everything else, take castor oil.
Okay, those are some very interesting remedies. Now, some of them I've heard of, some I might have even tried. But when I'm feeling ill, I really prefer more modern treatments, like you might get through Mountain States Health Alliance, especially from their nurses. We sat down with many of their nurses to get their perspective on what it's like to deal with patients every day. And this is what they told us.
I had a lady I had taken care of for several months. She had a lot of health issues and was below the knee amputee and was having phantom pain. You can't give any kind of special medicine for something like that. I felt honored to care for her and to coach her through that pain. There's a whole spiritual aspect of caring for someone. Despite the pain, she had faith through it all. And that restores my own faith too.
I remember a patient that I recall who affected me was a woman who was one of 12 children. She would talk to me while I administered to her. They lived on a farm and raised everything they ate. Vegetables, meat, everything.
And you had to get to the table early if you wanted something to eat. If you were late, you might miss the chicken. It was a good lesson. I was on time for everything in my life because you never knew what you might miss if you were late. It just might be delicious.
She was missing her sisters who had already passed away, and I did her wound care, which was very painful. But she told stories about her family as I worked on her, and I could see her pain ease, if only for a little while when the stories were being told.
One thing I know is you never stop being a nurse. not at home, not in the community. It's a part of who we are.
The most amazing conversations happen in the wee hours of the morning. One patient, she was old and frail and very sick. She was doing a lot of reflecting and asked me to pray with her. I did. A couple of days later, she passed. I felt that loss. It's always a special moment when a patient asks you to pray with them.
When patients are transferred to Johnson City Medical Center, they're often very far from home. What I learn is to embrace the family because they're coming far away and full of fear and anxiety. When we ask patients what they want, the main thing they say is communication. So we work hard to bring that to them and to the families. It's important to listen to the patient. We have to know their goals.
Those are some really moving perspectives. Joseph Sobel has a story that can speak to that last idea, about listening. He was with our region's own Ray Hicks, the famous Jack-Tell storyteller, while Ray was brought in by his family to seek medical help. Now, before I give anything else away, I'll just ask Joseph to come to the stage and tell us that story. Joseph?
Gonna lay down my old guitar. Gonna lay down my old guitar. I wish I could strap it to my side and carry it along with me. Susan O'Connor was dumbstruck by this. Susan is the longtime programming director of the International Storytelling Center, and we were standing in the hall of the pediatric ward at Johnson City Medical Center. Ray Hicks was in his room with the doctor. Susan was saying, "You wouldn't believe it." Ray had been admitted a couple days before because he was feeling poorly. He'd missed the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesborough for the first time in many, many years. And his friends finally persuaded him to come down off the mountain and see some real doctors. And trying to get him through those gatekeepers, well, that's another story. It was one of the most amazing medical interviews of all time. But there he was in the hospital, and he had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer of the prostate and the colon, metastasized to his bones. And Susan said, this morning Ray took a walk up and down the hall, and when he was on his way back, he came to the nurses' station. And he turned around to all the people in the hallway, patients, doctors, nurses, orderlies, everyone, and he said, "They say the cancer's going to take me. I figure if I'm going to go, I might as well go singing." And he raised his great big long arm and started leading the whole hospital in singing, "Gonna lay down my old guitar." It was amazing. Well, Ray was in there with the doctor, and we were waiting to go in and see him. And down the hall came a little girl, 10, 11 years old. Her hair burned off by the chemo and the radiation. Just a little fuzz on top, a few strands dropping down. And her old palsied grandma was walking with her, clinging to the railing, shaking so bad she could hardly stand. And it was hard to tell which one was sicker. And as they came up to us, I said, "You like stories?" She nodded. I said, "Well, you're in luck today because one of the greatest storytellers in the country is right here along your hall. That makes you neighbors." And Ray likes neighbors, so maybe if he gets free, we can go in there and I can introduce you. She nodded. So pretty soon the door came open and the doctor brushed past us. And it looked like Ray was in a receptive mood, so we walked in. And I said, "Ray, this is Kimberly. She lives right here on your hall. That makes you neighbors." And Ray asked her name, first name, last name. They compared notes, you know. She was a Presley. He was related to some Presnells on his mother's side. That made them almost kinfolk. So after they took care of those formalities, Ray settled back. He said, well, this story is about a time when older folk didn't mind hitting young people. Sometimes for no reason at all. Just hit them just to make them pay attention, Hit them with a board, hit them with a strop, leave bruises in their bones sometimes, Sometimes they never get better. Some folks think that might be what's wrong with me. But same thing happened to Jack. His father took to whooping him because he didn't do his chores. Jack said, I did them, but father wouldn't believe him, just whooped him just in case. And Jack had enough. Figured he'd light out, run away. So that's what he did. And Ray went on to tell the story of Jack and the animals, which is about how Jack ran away from home, started a new family with a donkey, an ox, a dog, a cat, a rooster. And they all went off and found their fortune through grace and cleverness and through sticking together, made a new family. And he leaned back in bed and he made all the animal sounds, the sounds of the donkey, the sounds of the ox, the sounds of the dog, the cat, the rooster, the robbers, everything. And he just closed his eyes and disappeared into the story. And all the while the monitors were bleeping and making their little patterns in the monitor there. And the intercom was blaring out in the hall, and gurneys were rolling by, going by empty, coming back full, But all that disappeared. And everybody in that room just looked at the storyteller, or looked through him into the story, and watched it go by. And when Ray was done, I turned to the little girl and I said, you're a lucky girl to hear that story that way today from that man. And she nodded, and she skipped off down the hall. And that's when her granny said, she ain't even got a daddy. Her daddy's so mean, found him another woman before she was even born. Won't even send her a Christmas card. And I don't know how it happened that Ray, in that mysterious alchemy that storytellers can have sometimes, he honed in on the one story in the entire Jack Tale universe where Jack's daddy was plumb mean too. And I don't know how he knew it, but he did. And I don't know how long that girl had to live with that or to think about it. I know Ray lasted another 2 years. They sent him home, gave him 6 months. He said, thank you very much, and he took 2 years. But on that day, that girl was like Jack, and like any of us who've had a great storyteller in our lives, just plumb lucky.
Thank you, Joseph. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to A Night with the Jonesborough Yarn Exchange on WETS 89.5 FM out of Johnson City, Tennessee. And we're back. And as promised, we've brought back the Jonesborough Novelty Band.
Music always makes me feel better. Listening to music makes me walk a lot better too.
Summer, that is so great to hear. So here they are, Summer, just for you, the Jonesborough Novelty Band.
Here we are. Well, this weekend is the Jonesborough Days, and we always have a float and sing songs. We invite you to come. It's a great time. There's a kickoff dinner on Thursday night, and then Jonesborough Days is Friday and Saturday. And these are some songs that we sing during this time.
I saw the weather forecast.
Weather forecast?
Yes, for this weekend. It'll be in the mid-60s most of the weekends. Calm down.
It's always wonderful weather in Jonesborough. So join us in singing in a good old summertime. In the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, strolling down that shady lane with your baby hand, and she holds yours, and that's a very good sign that she should sing with singing the good old summertime. When you're smiling, when you're smiling, when you're smiling, when you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you. When you're laughing, when you're laughing, whoa, 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 the sun comes shining through. When you're smiling, you bring out the rain, stop that sighing, be happy again, 'cause when you're smiling, when you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you. Well, I'm a Yankee Doodle man, a Yankee Doodle dime, a real live nephew of my Uncle Sam, born on the 4th of July. I got a Yankee Doodle's sweetheart, she's my Yankee Doodle toy. Yankee Doodle came to London just to ride a ponies. I am a Yankee Doodle boy. Hey, you're a grand old flag, you're a high flying flag, and forever it be straight away. In the end, the land I love, all of the free and the brave. Well, every heart beats true, red, white, and blue. There's never a ghost of gray. Should old acquaintance be forgotten, you ride on the red old flag. You ride on the red old flag. This next song is one that was written by Irving Berlin, of all people. So it's not a modern song. And it was made popular by Kate Smith. How many of you remember Kate Smith? Yeah? Kate Smith! She used to sing this song at the Philadelphia Flyers hockey games. And I ask you to stand as we sing God Bless America. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside
Thank you so much, guys. I've got to tell you, I always feel better every time I hear you play. Thank you. And let's give another hand now for the Jonesborough Novelty Band.
In the South, in the late 30s, there were no taxes for neglecting mandatory medical insurance. In the South, in the late 30s, there was no medical insurance, especially for farmers who lived off the land. They earned that money off the land, ate off the land, found healing by the land. In that summer heat, when the mornings started before the sun rose and daylight savings didn't change the time that the cows were milked, and doctors, when you could afford them, still made house calls and carried little black bags. Home remedies were the norm. It was more affordable, and most importantly, kept you out in the field. You see, farmers couldn't afford sick days, but they still could afford to impress women. Farmers needed hardy wives who could grow a kid as well as raise a vegetable. A hardy woman was someone who enjoyed the feel of dirt under her fingernails and wasn't scared when the coyotes came calling for the chickens after dark. But no farmer could catch a fine woman if he had warts on his hands. Which is why, in the South, in the late 30s, at the end of a harsh day of farming, my grandfather could be found on his front porch, wearing a sweat-stained shirt, a